Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. And in July, I don't know about where you're at, but it is hot here. It is in the triple digits. It's been in the triple digits. It's going to continue to be in the triple digits. I guess that's what summer's all about. So I wanted to come on here and share with you the theme for this month. The podcast is adventure. And I'm so excited to share this first episode that is being launched for the month with you that I just actually on a whim recorded with an amazing woman that I have connected with and met in person a few months ago. And she actually has a podcast of her own. And she is like, adventure is the theme of her life. So I'm very excited to share these episodes that I have recorded with you guys, with women that have shared their stories of adventure through traveling across the world and just living life with the adventure hat always on and looking as life itself as an adventure and selling everything that they've owned to live on a sailboat and travel the world. I mean, these women are just so inspiring by their stories, and the messages in these episodes and these conversations is so huge. I'm just so lucky to have had the connections that I've had and the communication and the community that I have built through this podcast and these wonderful, wonderful women. And I'd love for you to think like, what's your adventure? You know, I'm currently in a season of solo parenting for the summer. My husband is a wildland fire. He's gone. He can't come home. He sometimes comes home every 21 days for a few days and then gets on the road again. So I'm currently wearing all the hats around here and trying to think of it as a little bit of an adventure versus like I'm stuck here. The negative can kind of consume, or the isolation can kind of get a little sad, but just trying to make the best of this, especially with my two boys and learning how to navigate being a mom of two and also by myself. I am starting back to my 9 to 5 here in a couple weeks, which I can't say I'm excited for, but it's going to be just another hat I have to wear in the midst of solo parenting and again, running the show. So again, trying to think of this as our own adventure has been a lot more enjoyable than it could have been, or it started off to be when I started to shift my mindset on it. And us ourselves, we're going on a few adventures this summer as far as we're going to go camping and we're going to have help, of course, but it's going to be fun to go be in nature and show my boys what I love about life and the adventures that I once did solo, and now I'm incorporating family into them and looking forward to carry on some traditions with them moving forward. And that's kind of what this episode is about, is like, choose what is your adventure. It looks like something different for everybody. Kat Caldwell Meyers is my guest this week, and I just love this conversation with her. And we talked about many of her life's adventures that she has had and all the lessons and like the pattern of like, you have sometimes when you're choosing a path to go down or choosing an adventure to take, it's like, okay, I gotta make this decision. And then you're gonna hear the noise. You have to hear the noise as part of this decision. And whether it's fear or other people in your ear or, society telling you, well, you should be doing this or whatever, you're going to hear that. And then if you take this space to sit with yourself in the silence to make that decision for yourself versus letting the fear make that decision or somebody else make that decision for you. And then you got to go. You got to make that split second decision of like, oh, am I going to choose this or am I going to do that? And especially when you're in it, like she talks anywhere from like horseback riding to skiing and whitewater rafting. She talks about so many of her adventures and motherhood. We talk about the adventure of motherhood in this podcast episode and like how there are so many patterns amongst life and life being an adventure in itself. So I hope you enjoy this episode. This was such an amazing connection. Like I said, we kind of just did it on a whim. We both are home with kids. She has sick kiddos. I'm obviously solo parenting. So we corresponded around nap time, and you will hear my baby grunting and making noises in the back. So that is what that noise is if you're wondering. So yeah, join me in welcoming Kat Caldwell Meyers to the podcast, and I hope you enjoy this month of the theme of adventure, and maybe stop and think, like, what's your next adventure gonna be? Welcome to the Kindred Journey podcast, the podcast where women share their experiences of stepping into courage when comfort is no longer an option. This is the podcast for connecting in community with women who have been shaped by the liberating to challenging seasons that life endures. I am your host, Leslie. I am a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. I too have experienced these seasons in life, and I want you to know that you are surrounded by a community of courageous, real women here for you. I can't wait to connect, so grab your favorite beverage and join me on this kindred journey. All right, Kat. Well, thanks for hopping on here with me. I appreciate you kind of doing this on a whim.
That's kind of the only way I fly, my friend.
I love it. I love it. Well, cheers to that. Welcome to the Kindred Journey podcast. And this is a place where I have women come on and share their stories of courage over comfort. And I know we've kind of connected throughout the past few months, and we did a podcasting, or did you do YTTP or just Fully Abundant or Kathy's World?
I've done a
There's
lot of her programs. I don't think we were in the same Your Turn to Podcast. I did 2022.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
but
I
yeah,
did last year. So welcome to the podcast. Bridger is also saying welcome. And
Ritter.
I will mute myself throughout this interview because I do have my almost 4-month-old along for the ride for this one. So, but Kat, would you mind giving just a brief introduction about yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, so my name is Kat. I live right outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I first came here in 1999, and I just fell in love with these mountains, with the energy here, with the people, the place. I grew up in New Mexico. When I think back to being a child, like the little one we have in front of us here, I think about horses and just feeling really awakened with animals and in nature. That's always been true for me. I've been told perhaps I have shamanic qualities. I don't know. My work capacity, I've worked as a teacher, I've worked as a healer, I've worked as a life coach. And right now I help other women to start podcasts. So that's what I do professionally. I'm also a mom and a wife, and right now we have 9 animals. Soon to be a lot more than that because we have puppies coming next month. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of me. I don't know what more you want to know, but here we are.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Kat. I have been enjoying listening to your podcast as well. I mentioned that to you earlier, and just appreciate what you're doing. And like you said, coaching women to get their voice heard and get it out there. So and I love your energy. Yes, there's something about the Tetons that is just one of the most magical places on earth. It's just breathtaking. I did a half the oh gosh, the half marathon, the national parks, their themes. Gosh, when was that? That was 2016 already. Oh my
A
gosh, yeah,
lifetime ago.
yeah, like that's a long time ago. But I was like, there's no other place I'd want to run or do a half marathon because the view was just incredible the whole way. It was such an amazing run. But well, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate that. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm kind of doing months of themes for my podcast and courage And I know there's a lot of courage with things that are out of our control, but maybe whatever you feel is calling to you. But the month of July is on adventure, and I know adventure is part of your podcast name. So I felt like you were one of the perfect people to have on this month. And is there a moment or season of that you decided to choose courage when comfort was no longer an option?
Yeah, it's interesting what's coming to mind for me is when we go against the norm, right? So like last night I was at a music festival and I noticed everybody was there with people, right? They were there together and I was there with four children. So I was kind of like the only adult. I was taking care of a couple neighbor kids with mine. And I recognize just being alone in a space where lots of people are together can be an act of courage, and how many times have I done that? And I was listening to another podcaster this morning. She's referred to as the female Joe Rogan, okay? And she was saying, first of all, I don't like that. But second of all, people say I'm loud. I don't think I'm speaking loudly. I'm just speaking, right? And so I think for me, sometimes we think that an adventure needs to be really, really major. Like it needs to be Mount Everest. It doesn't. Sometimes it's just going to a space and feeling like an outsider and standing your ground anyway. And saying, you know what? This is how it's supposed to be. This is actually remembering it's an act of courage to go out to eat by yourself, right? To take a moment, we were talking earlier, both of us kind of being single moms right now, even though we have partners because our partners are not at home with us, they're traveling, right? And remembering to just carve out those tiny little spaces to meditate, right? Like that's an act of courage. Sometimes we don't recognize that self-care is an act of courage. I mean, these are the adventures to actually be present to the adventure, which is in this moment all the time.
I love that. That's so true. And like you said, just the small act of courage to be somewhere by yourself. I feel like you kind of feel like that's vulnerable, right? That's you could feel kind of naked. Or I notice a lot of people pull their phones out at the grocery store, or when you're by yourself eating. I travel for work sometimes where I have to travel for work by myself, and so I will have to eat by myself. And imagine the conversations that you can engage in or connect with other humans. But a lot of us, and this is the day and age we live in, but we gravitate to just, oh my gosh, I feel uncomfortable, I need to get on my phone. And I think, like what you said, going to a festival or a music series where it's kind of unconventional, you're kind of by yourself. I mean, at least your own age group. It wasn't like you were going with another mom friend or something like that, but you went, and I'm sure it was a great time.
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. Yeah, we have this great Thursday night music series in Victor, Idaho called Music on Main. And it's a hoot. Anyone coming through, you've got to check it out. It's really a lot of fun. But yeah, I was thinking also, like I was listening to Melinda Gates this morning and we were just hanging out on Jay Shetty's podcast actually. And she was talking about the importance of silence in her practice. And I feel like that's a big piece of it, especially you were talking about running a half marathon in the Tetons, right? But any major adventure that you commit to and embark on, you are going to have long periods of silence. I'm thinking Pulp Fiction right now, the uncomfortable silence. Some of them are not going to be pleasant, where you're like, I really don't know how I'm going to get out of here. A lot of the adventures and outdoor pastimes that I'm drawn to, river guiding, horses, skiing, paragliding, you have to make those decisions at lightning speed. You don't have time to be in the comfortable silence, but you often make them in complete silence. Like it's a void. It's just you. It's your decision what you can or can't do. And I was thinking, because sometimes you hop into a boat with a bunch of people and you're all going down when the raft flips. You know what I mean? I'll never forget when I was in river guide training, we came up on this really big rapid and we trained for it, we knew the angle, but the guy hadn't really set it up right. And this girl in the front, she had this like great southern accent, and she just jumped into the middle of the boat with her paddle and was like, "We're not gonna make it." And the rest of us were like, paddle, because sometimes, it's really just you. And if you get dumped in the water, now it is just you in the river. It always was, though. Even when you're working with a group, even when you're parenting, how are you doing? Like that's like the biggest act of courage that I can think of, and the greatest adventure is to fall in love with and tap into your own life, like yours, not everybody else's, but yours. How is yours going? And is this the life that you came here for? And if not, where do you need to redirect?
Oh my gosh, all of that is so beautiful. I would love to unpack so much of that. And something you kind of said earlier was like, it takes an act of courage for self-care. And I think tapping into what kind of that kind of falls into kind of what you just said, as far as like it always is just you at the end of the day. And like you said, redirect. And I think I resonate with everything you said so much because I feel like in this season right now of solo parenting, I'm learning how to tap into myself again in a weird way, even though I am caring for two littles, but it's a way that I am what works for me and to remain curious, I think, along the way and ask good questions to yourself because I feel like, at least for me in my mid 30s, I had kids in my early 30s and I was comfortable, had my career, I was settled, established, did all the things in my 30s, got married, had kids, but like, and that really shakes you up because you're living with another person. And then you have these kids who, I mean, take all expectations or goal, all these things that you have, like, you think you have control over in your mind and how things are going to go. But no, it's kind of parenting's its own adventure. But like, so yeah,
Mm,
I can
mm.
definitely resonate with what you're saying because I feel like I'm kind of on that own courageous adventure of parenting solo but also rediscovering who I am as a newer postpartum mom. I'm 4 months postpartum and I'm different than what I was with my first. And I feel like every postpartum journey is also kind of a different sequence of unfolding and unveiling yourself and figuring out who you really are to the core. So I can definitely resonate in a different light with what you just shared.
Totally. I think the adventure I've been engaging on recently, and this like just came through, I think last week, is okay, so we talk a lot about self-care, but I realized for me right now, it's actually self-empathy, which is a little bit different, where I start to realize like, oh, of course I'm tired. Like you know those I'm an Idahoan. Of course I have animals in my backyard. You know what I mean? Like I'm solo parenting. Of course I'm exhausted at the end of the day. And
Right.
it could quote just be parenting too. I think that we have, empathy is such a buzzword right now, especially in business, especially in different spiritual circles. But what about actually looking at it for yourself? And something that came through for me in the writing of the book, The Adventure Paradox, which is about this crazy adventure I took as a postpartum mom, right? Right after I had my second. So similar kind of thing where it is a little bit different. Suddenly it's like, whoa, it's not just me and this one being. It's like now this whole family, now there are two, and who am I in that? And how am I going to continue to hold on to the parts of me and also become this new person, right? But I feel like when we actually take a moment to turn the lens back on ourselves without any victimhood or martyrdom, because that's what came up for me through that was this like, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me kind of a story. And starting to recognize the only real model of motherhood I had was my own mom, right? And we all get to go through the journey then of our relationship with our own parents, right? And that adventure and how healed are we in that conversation so that we can not pass on some of the wounds to our children, we can heal those, and that comes from some self-empathy, I really think.
Yeah, that is so beautiful, everything that you just said. And I can fully resonate with that, especially because, we all have past traumas. We all have things from our childhood and like you said, kind of reinventing yourself, but also like the things that you want to pass on to your children and the things that you want to end with you. And I was just talking about earlier this week, I was having a conversation about generational trauma and and how what comes from your grandmother, who was in the depression, or so on and so forth. So it's just, and you don't realize what's carried down, and to consciously be aware of what is carried down, I think takes a lot of work, and the discovery part of that process as well. And I have a very excited little one. And yeah, I just think, and I don't know, I feel like part of motherhood makes you come alive. Like it unleashes this piece of you that you didn't almost know existed in a weird, wild way. But also, I just think what you're doing, and like I said, with the podcast and your adventure, newly postpartum after your second was born, I think that's such a wild story in itself. I mean, just, and some of the people that you've had on your podcast, I've heard some of their stories. It's just incredible, the adventure piece of it. I think there's something to that where it it and the empathy part, like you like, and the split decision part that you said earlier, like there's so much that's coming to light right now that I don't want to word vomit. But like I just feel like you have to have empathy with adventure, because you have to try things, and it's okay to fail, because that's how you learn, especially in like an adventure setting, whatever it is, horses, skiing, like, oh, I'm not going to go down that chute again, or I think you backcountry ski, I've heard on your podcast, like you have to make those split-minute decisions, but like, but you learn by doing. So I think in adventure, you have to have that empathy for yourself up as a part of the process.
Totally. I think it's a huge part of the process. And I think it's also empathy for beginner's mind, because at any
Mm.
moment we're a beginner again, where we're
Mhm.
like, I've never experienced this. Like, I don't know how to deal with this, which is essentially what becoming a parent is, where you're like, oh, okay, I have raised a lot of animals and helped a lot of different kinds of animals, but this is different, you know? And so much a part of you. I feel like when we think we've mastered something, and I talk about this in the book too, we are probably off the beam, you know?
Mm.
We've always got to be able to return back to that first conversation, that first like joy. You were talking about feeling alive. Where's
Mhm.
that aliveness? And I think it was Helen Keller who said, life is either a great adventure or nothing at all. I
Mhm.
hope I got that quote right, but forgive me if it's from
Beautiful
someone else.
quote.
It's a beautiful quote, but the truth is, if we don't feel like the life that we're on is a capital A adventure,
Mm.
what's going on? Like why and where and when did someone tell us, or did we embrace playing small?
Mm. I think, yeah, I think that for me, I think it's a lot of societal conditioning. And because everything that you're saying, like, so I used to college rodeo. I rode horses growing up. So but I got a real job, and I got rid of the horses, and, got the 9 to 5. And it's just, and I have friends who still rodeo and ride and are going through this kid, the littles stage with kids with horses. And it's fun to see, them bring their kids up in it. And that was the most freeing place I've ever felt, is on the back of a horse. It's just, and like you said, if we're not having fun and had like adventure in our lives, then where did we stop, and what? And as kids, all you do is play all day, creative curiosity mindset. You're just constantly like a sponge molding into this human. And yeah, I feel like honestly, ever since I became an adult, quote unquote, it's like responsibility trumped fun and adventure. And I was talking to somebody after the podcasting summit in May, and they said, I feel like in this season of motherhood, I've kind of longed for my old fun days, especially with adventure and skiing, and uh going to Braun Brothers, festival, like that was fun to me. She said, well, maybe if you like redefined your definition of fun, especially in this season of littles, and like now that my older one is getting older to where I can teach him things that I love to do as fun. And but it really got me thinking. And like we did a backyard camp out a few nights ago, just the three of us. And like people are like, "Oh, you're so brave for," I'm like, that was fun to me, you know? So, anyways, it's just like I've been trying to redefine my definition of fun and adventure, especially like in this phase, because I felt like it was kind of dragging me down a bit, limiting my belief of not being able to do what I used to be able to do. I can still do it. It's just going to look a heck of a lot different. And I went on a
Mm.
hike after I got back from the podcasting summit, and I was like, I really, and I was supposed to meet up with a friend, and we got disconnected on time and whatever. So I was like, the kids are loaded, the dogs are loaded. So I went with my two kids and my three dogs, and I went for a hike. Again, it wasn't what it used to be, but so, and I think allowing, like you said, allowing yourself permission to become a beginner. And I think when we're adults, at least for myself, I know how to do something well and I'm comfortable at doing it. I don't want to get uncomfortable trying to learn, but I feel like I almost need to force myself to do that because it is fun in the process of
Mm.
like being a beginner again, and learning how to podcast has been fun because it's something new for me. And I never thought I'd be a podcaster. So here I am.
Yeah, I think that's making me think about like again the beginner's mind and children, and our kids, like the first time they get to experience sleeping in a tent, sleeping outside under the stars, like bugs, the first time they experience a bug bite or a skinned knee or eating out at a restaurant or whatever. And the thing is, I think what we forget when we get into capital A adulting is that like we had that experience as a 3 month old, and then a 3 year old, and then a 13-year old, and then a 23-year old. But now that we're like adults, we're not allowed to have it as a new experience, different from, say, last year, you know? And one adventure story I was thinking about, I went heli-skiing for my husband's 50th birthday. I don't know if I told you this story. But I went heli-skiing. It's been something I'd always wanted to do, right? And he really wanted to go for his 50th. And so we got a good price through Snake River, which is, they go into the Hoback here. So it's not like Alaska, but it is backcountry skiing from a helicopter, okay? With a guide. And the week that we were supposed to fly, Kobe Bryant's helicopter went down in LA. And my family was like, you have young children. Our kids at the time were, oh, let's see, about 1 and 3. Okay. Like, I realized if I go down, they won't even know me. If we both go down, they would not have memories of us, really, you know?
Wow.
And I remember my husband and I like writing a letter to them, thinking like, shit, we got to think about this. Like, if we're really doing this. And then I remember talking to a lot of older spiritual friends and like my family. They could not understand why I was doing this. They could not understand it. Like, why would you put yourself in that position? And I remember one 7-year-old woman saying to me, I would never put myself in the position you're putting yourself in. And I remember thinking, like, well, of course you wouldn't. Like, you're not a backcountry skier. This isn't a calling for you, Like, you don't even, like, you wouldn't even want a heli ski. So, of course, it seems like even crazier to you. But this is actually like a next step for me and has always been. And it's this special time. But also, yeah, I am feeling it really differently now that I'm a mom. And so the way that heli skiing works is you usually have like a 4 day window for a 1 day trip. And so we had some like ski resort passes and we were waiting literally for the skies to clear. And I remember waking up and praying every day. And I was like, I was really nervous. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go anymore. I mean, I honestly was like, maybe I won't go. Like, whoa, maybe I'm not gonna like, maybe I was supposed to like get this close to the edge and say, I'm not gonna do it. And then Kobe Bryant happened. And then my aunt, she's a flight attendant, she was also on the trip with us. She said, the safest time to fly is right after an accident, right? Because everybody's really on point. It's the safest day, the day after. And it was the day after. And the next day, it was the last day in our flight window, the skies parted. And I woke up and I just turned it over. I was like, okay, God, if I was supposed to take this flight, I'm just gonna trust you. Like tomorrow, the skies will clear and we'll go. And wouldn't you know, That particular day is like one of the all-time best adventure stories. And I can tell you the whole story if you want to hear it. But the point is, I wouldn't have known if I hadn't gone. But you also have to go through the pre-work, the beginner's mind, like the fears, the beginner's mind in new motherhood, right? And
Mhm.
that's where I go back to like the silence because it's nobody else's story but yours. Whatever
Mhm.
anybody else thinks it should or shouldn't be, mute them and go back to what's this that I'm hearing? Or if you hear something that you're like, maybe that is true, maybe I shouldn't go, let that work through you until you hear your own voice again.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's just I got goosebumps listening to that story, and that's I can only imagine the feeling that you had like doing it. You know what I mean? Like just like you said, you tune everybody out, the silence of just you and yourself and your heart, your own heartbeat. Like, and good for you for doing it. Cause like you said, you kind of I think that's a perfect analogy of life, right? Like you strip away all the narratives, all the shoulds, all the responsibilities, and like what makes you you. And something that you kind of said earlier is like get back on the path of what makes you happy. And like I think that kind of comes full circle with what we were talking about earlier. I think, and I love that starting with the beginner's mind, I feel like gets rid of any kind of narrative that is going along with like an expectation or an outcome. Like if you have a beginner's mind, I feel like you are capable of anything because you truly don't know you know nothing about nothing. So I love that story and kudos to you. That sounds like an amazing experience. And yeah, no, I love that. I'd love to hear the rest if you want to share it because I'm just on the edge over here like sitting listening.
Yeah, well, I'll share a little more. And I think the other thing I'll say is like, it's back to who do you get in that boat with, right? And who are you tied to? And so in this situation, I was tied to my husband. It was for his 50th. My aunt and uncle were also with us, right? So we were a foursome with a guide. And my husband has done a lot of backcountry skiing too. And so is they're like giving us the safety talk, right? Like we're going now. I'm in a good mood. I've like let go of my fears. I'm like, whatever. I'm gonna turn it over to the guide. I've been a guide. Like I know how to be a good customer, I'm gonna turn it over. And so they're giving us the safety talk, and my husband is that guy in the back of the room raising his hand. Like, there's one other thing I'd like to add. If you do put a probe in and somebody, you might like feel them grab it. There might be, and so he's like adding to what the guides, and I can tell by the end of it, he's done this a few times they're kind of rolling their eyes like, who is this guy? Because he's like, and one time in Chile, this happened when I was saving someone's life. And so he's totally set himself up to be that guy. So, anyways, we get in the chopper. You've got like so much adrenaline going, right? You're like flying around these beautiful slopes, and then you land on top of a mountain and you get out. And again, you can feel that heart like in your head. You know what I mean? Like you're very much alive. And my uncle took this video of my husband. He was the last one out of the chopper, and he very nearly knocked out this sensor that would have meant the chopper wouldn't have worked for the rest of the day. You can see his boot is like this close as he's like trips out of the chopper, right? And so there's that experience. We're kind of chuckling about that and like kind of playing with my partner, like, what, come on, stop trying to run the show, right? So, anyways, the chopper goes away, and it gets quiet and still, and you're getting ready, you're like buckled in, everybody's good, we're talking to the guide, we're talking about our line, like where we're gonna head from here, you can just feel it all, right? And then all of a sudden we hear this, I look over and my husband has deployed his Avalon. It's this like it's not an Avalon, but it's this like bright orange. I can't remember what they're called, but if you get caught in an avalanche, it basically works like an inner tube, right? And so he looks like this like giant chameleon with this bright orange halo around him. And I see the guide like take out his radio and he's like, "You're gonna have to lap us. We've just deployed the first again parachute or whatever they call it of the season, right?" And I just remember like that became this like classic joke between all of us is like, watch when you're in that moment. Again, going back to beginner's mind, and my husband's super self-deprecating about I mean, his face turned that bright orange color. Like he was mortified, you know what I mean? It's like his trip and it's his birth and like this whole thing. And there he was, whoops. That was a really funny moment. And there were many others like that, like the depth of that story, the guide that we were with. I really like to get into some of the nitty-gritty of when you press the edge of what's real for you, right? So I was asking him like about his guiding experience and if he'd been in many avalanches and if he'd ever like been close to losing his life, basically. And he shared with us some stories about, having been every single thing you look for, recently divorced, right? Out with a bunch of guys, something to prove, and nearly died. So these little things where like we gain wisdom from these stories, but sometimes it's just humor that you need too, right? Like that's like the biggest thing I go back to with that one. And I think the other big piece of that story that comes out for me, which I think is important for people to hear, is when you're doing something like skiing or boating or whatever, and you're attached to gear, and this is true with horseback riding too, taking care of your leather, right? If you're not taking good care of your equipment, or if you're handing that over to somebody else, this is something you really need to pay attention to. And so my husband had changed the din setting on my skis to a 4, which I didn't really think anything of. But when you're in that kind of deep powder, this is too low a din setting. So I popped out of my skis like 3 or 4 times at weird random points where I was like, but again, I was in such a good mood about it. I was like, whoops, like, what the hell was that? Hop out of my skis into the powder again. So I think so much of it also comes back to that mindset and just
Mm.
like when you're in the space of trust and knowing it's going to be okay no matter what. And in fact, you could have some great story come out of this adventure that you didn't even anticipate, like the ones I just shared. So there you go.
That's that's amazing. I'm sure that was a very humbling experience for your husband.
Poor guy, whoop,
Yeah,
right
right.
sized.
But I think that's so true what you just shared about trusting. And I think, fear is there for a reason. It's there to protect us. But I feel like in this day and age, a lot of people let fear overdrive and take the driver's seat a little bit. And like you said, whatever adventure is going to come from this experience, it's going to be a great one. And, we both know Kathy Heller and her world. And, she always says, take the how out of it. Like, how do I get here? How do I do this? And I'm a very analytical person. I'm a appraiser I assess value for farms, so the how for me is where my brain is parked a lot of the time. And so it's like, but take it out because the outcome's going to be so much better than you can even imagine or what you've expected or because if you how it the whole way and take the fear and take the safe road and it's like then the outcome's going to be very safe, very protected and not this exhilarating experience that this adventure is meant to be. And like you said, imagine if you would have let fear take the driver's seat with choosing not to do that experience. And like you said, just everything that came from it. And you just kind of, let go and let God and you trust and that it's going to be okay. And that, like, I love what your aunt said about everybody's on their A game the day, the day after. But yeah, I just, I love that whole story. And it's like I said, just kind of like the trajectory of life's adventure as far as like the message and trusting and staying true to yourself and staying authentic with yourself and what your heart's desire is and yeah, like you said, you need certain gear to get you along the way and you can like my husband's a smoke jumper. They make all their own gear except the parachutes at their loft and they stitch everything and like they have to make sure their gear is secure. My husband had a double malfunction one year it was when we first started dating. His main had tension line or tension knots, and then his reserve came out and it also it didn't come out correctly. So he was like, I think like 320 feet from the ground. And he had to think, like you said, that split, he was all by himself it was definitely like a spiral towards the ground. And he made a split second decision to save his life. Like you don't come back from a double malfunction. So, and he did. And I think it takes a lot of courage in that moment, in that adventure moment, that life or death moment, that you have to you're sitting with yourself and God pretty much to make that decision that's best for yourself in that adventure or in that experience or that circumstance.
Yeah, totally. I'm so glad he came back too, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
We
oh,
just started dating. I was like, "What's that?" And then I was like, "Oh, kind of a big
oh
deal."
my gosh. Kind
And yet,
of. Well,
yeah.
I think the thing, and I just did a series on my podcast with athletes, and something that came through was this idea that it's not for everybody. you
Mhm.
know, I was sort of joking with one gal who's like a pro mountain biker, and she was like, yeah, talking about this thumb injury. Well, I was about to drop this like 13-foot cliff, and and I just said, I was like, has anyone said to you, you're kind of different, like that's not everybody just says, oh, I was about to drop a 13-foot cliff, or I was a smoke jumper, about to jump into a
Jump out of
fire,
a plane.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I think for folks to recognize it's not for everyone. You do
Mhm.
you. Like that goes back to that authenticity. You find what's right for you because that feels so you with a capital Y that there's no question in it. There's
Mhm.
no question in it. So I think that's where you know that you're there. And sometimes you have to hear the noise of other
Mhm.
people saying like, what? To find your own voice again. I mean, that's what I keep hearing coming through is like, if you're wondering if something's for you or not, find that silence and just keep asking because you're gonna
Mhm.
know, like just without a doubt, where you're like, oh, this is it. And sometimes you have to try it. We all had that first time, you know what I mean?
Right.
But you're gonna know. And I think the other thing is like, for me with paragliding, I loved paragliding. And there were so many sports that I loved that I recognized at a certain point. We have a saying there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. I recognized like I am not flying enough to feel like I'm a safe pilot who's going to become
Mhm.
a bold pilot. I'm kind of reckless. Like I kind of have a lot of other sports and things going on, and every now and then I get lucky and I'm flying with the Eagles and it's amazing, but I'm not like in it the way some of these sort of higher level pro paragliders are. And I don't see myself going that way. And I remember another small plane pilot friend of mine saying, who had also been a paraglider, he said, Kat, it's not a question of if you get hurt, it's a question of when and how bad. And I'd had enough friends, and this is true again with a lot of these really high risk, as my dad says, everyone has their different level of risk tolerance, Kat, But some people don't come back. They don't come back the same way, and having peace with that, that's something that changed for me in motherhood. I had different kinds of peace, and I gave my wing back actually before I became a mom, when I got married, because I just realized like it's not something I'm gonna do with my partner. It's like not, this is not where I'm going. This was a chapter of my life, and I closed it. So I think knowing there could be something that's just so you in your 20s and not you later, and that's okay. I think that's super important to acknowledge. To thine own self be true.
Right. No, I can resonate with that and I relate with that a lot, especially like and good on you, for recognizing that. I feel like sometimes people will push through, even like you said, if it's not for yourself anymore, or and something else that you said about sometimes you need to hear the noise to know if it's really for you. And I think hearing the noise and then sitting in that silence with yourself, like, okay, I've taken in what everybody has to say, or the fear. And I think something about what you just said about the old pilots and the bold pilots was like, especially in this age, I have a 2-year-old that's into everything and exploring. And like you said, it's not if you get hurt, it's when. And I'm not the helicopter mom. I'm more the free range parent. Like, go figure it out. I'm here to protect you and keep you safe. But like, I'm not going to say, be careful, be careful, be careful, because that creates hesitation, and that's a fear, you know, like that's the fear there, right? And like fear can create hesitation, like, and going back to your, you know, heli skiing experience, like that fear could have caused hesitation in you, and then something bad could have happened. Or like you just said about paragliding, like I was reckless, like not that there was the fear there, it was like, this is not for me anymore, I'm closing that chapter. And so like you said, you kind of heard the noise, sat with yourself in silence, and then made a decision for yourself versus letting the fear take over and then causing a hesitation and then something bad eventually potentially happening. And so I think that's also something to just recognize and deciding for you, like what is your adventure? Like you said earlier, it's not for everybody. And so I think, you know, and my husband's kind of maybe navigating that in his own, I'm not going to speak on his behalf, but like he's almost 40 and he has two boys now, and it's a risky job. Like it's is it where he wants to be? You know, I think he's just kind of navigating that right now, and I'm honoring that and holding the fort down and, you know, doing all the things here and being that support for him and holding that space for him, because that's honestly his choice, you know, moving down the road. So I just think all of it is so like life is one big adventure, and that's kind of like all of this that I'm absorbing, and I'm loving hearing your stories, and I'm loving seeing you as a mom of older children because again, right now I'm kind of more stuck to home and nap time and, you know, and so it's like this too shall pass. I see my sister take her kids um on ski trips, and, you know, so I know it's not forever. This is not forever. This will pass, and I will be able to share those adventure experiences with my kids and teach them, like you said, the camping and sleeping under the stars and the first bug bite, and just, and I think that's probably one of the things I enjoy the most about this season is seeing my son experience those things for the first time and just watching him experience it, I think is one of the most fascinating and fun things that I've enjoyed doing um lately. And so yeah, I was gonna say one other thing, but if you want to interject on anything, please do, because there's one more thing, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm loving it. And I think I'm getting this visual, so I'll just share it because I remember when I had littles and then I had two and I got the Bob double stroller. I don't know if you know these, but they're like kind of hardy, you know, like they can go out, they got the big mountain bike tires on
Oh
them.
yeah.
And I would like take runs with the dog or like do really long walks, you know, and you can have diapers and everything you need in there. You know what I mean? Like whatever happens, we're gonna be fine. And then I remember seeing, I don't know if it was social media or what, this woman running a half marathon or a marathon with triplets in a bob stroller in Bozeman. And I remember thinking like, oh, there's always another level, man. Like, whoa, like this is good for me. Like this is a lot. I feel like a boss when I go out and do a 5 mile walk with my Bob, a walk. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Oh
Like
yeah.
I'm good. But here this gal is rocking it with triplets and she's a runner and like, wow.
That's
And I
awesome.
think again, just like remembering we all have our thing, you know? We all have our thing, and that the thing can change, and that parenthood is like, to me, one of the greatest adventures of all. You know, I remember going through that experience of not really being able to relate to friends who didn't have kids anymore. Like I just couldn't relate in the same way. Like they were like, "Oh, you're tired. That must suck. You want to go have coffee?" And you're like, yeah, I was just like, like I was like a different kind of tired, you
Right.
know? And so like that circles back to sort of that like martyrdom thing. And I think sometimes we can like flip-flop it to I'm gonna be freaking super mom, super woman. Like I'm gonna just like rock out of this, you know? And starting to recognize that there could be a middle ground that's like just
Hmm.
totally okay. Because same thing, like I'm not a homebody. I'm like, let's go take an adventure. But learning to really embrace and be stoked about the homes that we have and the times that we would have in them and like first steps, you know, those memories and the pandemic, like where we were all really sheltering in place and really getting to know our homes and our family and whatever we had going on in that moment. And I think like the thing coming through for me, I wanted to share a story about something that happened recently where I recognized the old me probably would have pushed for it. And the new me is
Mm,
like, you know what? And I can think about a mentor who says this a lot. It doesn't all have to be a black diamond,
I love that.
or like living outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, double black diamond, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so the other week, I was invited to be part of an attempt to break the Guinness Book of World Records for the most people dressed up as butterflies. Okay, whatever, right? Like, whatever. But I realized in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, I realized like this is going to be a blast. My kids are going to love this. Like, how silly and ridiculous and fun. I totally want to be part of this. And then she asked, "Do you have any animals?" I was like, "Well, I have nine. Like, how many do you want me to bring?" And she was like, "Well, I want to do this pet parade. So I was thinking I would bring one of our horses and our pony dressed up as butterflies to this event." And so we went to Music on Main, that music event I was talking about. And a girlfriend of mine rode my horse Tiki, one of them, and I drove the pony with like a pony cart. And they're dressed up as butterflies. They weren't for that, but just to practice like crowd control and see how they were with big crowds. And she was riding with her 2-year-old child on her, who was also going to go to the event. She's also like paraglider and we're same cloth, right?
Sure.
And she was getting a little bouncy when we got close to the
Mm,
crowd. She's getting a little bouncy. And she ended up taking her child off and giving him to her husband, who's also like, what does he do? Dirt biking pro, the whole thing, right? And we rode around and we did some schooling. And then I ultimately realized, you know what? And this is one of my rules with kids and with these like high level adventures, you can do it. But if you don't have a helper, someone who can basically be responsible for like the adventure itself, like who's running the boat and then who's running the inmates, you know what I mean? As in the kiddos and the
sure.
people and the children, right? Like that's what I realized. And so for this event, as it got closer, I was like, we're not going to take the second horse. She's
Mm,
too much of a liability, especially with the kiddo. If we had another grown up who could help with her kiddo and she could just school the horse, fine. But otherwise, we're just going to take the pony. So we just took the pony, dressed up as a butterfly with a couple hundred people, to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And it was epic. But it was also this moment of recognition. What's the most important thing here? To have a super fun, capital F, safe adventure. And you know what? Sometimes you got to let go of a few of your wild cards. It's not that you can't do it, but you might be completely drained on the other side. You wonder why? So I think that's like that moment of clarity and growth when you start to realize you are taking in the lessons that parenting is giving you to do things differently moving forward and be even more present in each adventure.
absolutely. Yeah, no, 1000%. And I think that kind of goes back to what you mentioned about paragliding. You were ready to hang it up because it was, and I love that you're teaching your kids that you can still have these adventures, but there are, risks. You need to assess the risks and kind like you said, the noise and then sit with yourself and make the bet. Like you're teaching them these. I think that was such a great teachable moment for your daughters too, because I think, like my dad, we had horses, right? A horse is like a loaded gun. You never know when it's going to go off, and just kind of anything with adventures. Like it's like a loaded gun. You never know when it's going to go off. And you have to assess the risk and make the best decision that you can for like you said, you still wanted a fun outcome. And having that extra horse there was just going to maybe add a little bit of chaos and it wasn't safe. And if, like you said, if you had the helpers, if you had the team, I remember with my first, I went camping when he was 2.5 months. And if it wasn't for my sister who packed up all the tent and camping gear, like everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, wow, you did that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean I did, but I had my helpers. I couldn't have done it without my helpers." So, my sister's actually headed up here today. We're going to go up to Stanley for a few days and go camping. And so that's why we practice camped in the backyard a few nights ago. So I'm like, "All right, how's this going to go with two? Got to check it out." And then I'm making the assessment and then we're gonna go try an adventure. So yeah, no, I just love all of what you just shared. And I think, like you said, between the old you and the new you, and you know, I am a mom. I am responsible for not just adulting, but also responsible for two children as well. And like what you said,
Mhm.
with you and your husband going heli skiing, like writing letters to your kids. I'm like, that was part of assessing the risk, and what, like if we said life is one big adventure and there is risk and driving your car to the
Mhm.
grocery store, but like you can't let that
Mhm.
fear and that risk take the driver's seat, and like what we talked about earlier. So I just love all of this and this entire conversation that we've had, and I'm so glad we just got to hop on kind of on a whim. Like you said, that's how you roll. So I love it. Kat, if you wouldn't mind, just after all these experiences of adventure that you shared, is there one thing that you would share with your old self, hindsight 2020, looking back, knowing what you know now?
Remember that adventure doesn't stop, it just changes.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah, with your season, with your as you get older, like I see, my parents got married on the summit of Mount Bachelor, in Oregon. And so that's where I got my skiing finesse from. But they were skiing up until they couldn't anymore, and just like it just looks different. So I love
Yeah,
that. Parenting, it just gets different, So that adventure. Mountain biking, it just gets different, So when I'm gonna be
totally.
taking my toddler up on the hill. So yeah, I love that. I think that's so appropriate.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
saying in the ski industry that you've probably heard, but you don't grow old when you stop skiing. When you stop skiing, you grow old.
mm,
So I feel like same thing with all these things you love, it doesn't have to stop. Just got to
mhm,
change, just
right.
gonna look different how you approach it, especially when you're approaching it with a bunch of little ones on you. And I think the last thing is remember what you've been hearing on the airplane your whole life. Put the gas mask on you first. It's not just cliche. It really is true. And if there's something going on where you're just not feeling fulfilled, happy, I'm not all about, ooh, happy, happy, joy, joy all the time. You may be going through a season of grief or whatever it is, but to truly authentically feel what you need to feel, like take that breath, breathe it in for yourself first, because you can't really breathe for anybody else.
1000%, absolutely. I I couldn't agree more. And I think that's something I'm learning right now. Like I told you before we hopped on here, is like I just got in my hammock and meditated for 10 minutes, and it's all I needed, and like for me to be the best version of myself for this adventure right now that I'm in, And I think that's so true, because you're the only one that can make you happy. Like no one's coming to save you or get you, It's like it's truly up. And like if you spend yourself depleting yourself for everyone else, like what's left at the end of the day? Not a very good version of myself, So I can absolutely relate to that. And um I'm going to be a better version of myself to give to everybody else if I do that first. So
Yeah.
I think that's so important. And before we do go, I would love for you to share where everybody can find you, connect with you, reach out to you if they have any questions about any of your adventures or any hookups you might have or recommendations on what to do on your side of Idaho.
Oh my gosh. Well, the secret is we don't really want you to come to my side of Idaho. Like, stay where you are.
There's a sticker floating around that says keep California out of Idaho over here. So
That's right. That's right.
it's a
Just
secret. It's horrible here. Don't come. No.
don't come. Don't come. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. Just kidding. If this area calls you, I definitely hope you'll look me up. And right outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the Tetons in Victor, Idaho. You can find me online at Cat Caldwell Myers, on all the social feeds. And then my website is theadventureparadox.com. My podcast is The Adventure Paradox, formerly Horses, Mountains, and Dogs. And my book is also called The Adventure Paradox, How to Haul It All, Go Big, and Go Home. So those are lots of ways to go deeper in the conversation. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I do have your book over here on my shelf. It's on my list of to-dos. Maybe once my husband's home, I've been doing a lot of audio books this year and podcasts this summer. So it's
Yeah,
gone.
actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because if you send me a screenshot of a review of my podcast, I will send you a link to the audiobook. So,
Perfect. Well, I will do that
yeah.
right now.
Yeah, do that. Send it over via email or social media or whatever. This has been such a
Awesome.
joy to be on with you. I think the last thing I want to say is just the power of connection and conversation. This is why podcasting is so powerful and the conversations like this heal. So thank you so much
Oh
for
my gosh.
making the
No.
time and that it worked out with all of our kiddos and everything and nap time to do this today. It was super
Yes,
powerful.
Kat. Thank you so much for that. And yes, the connection and community with other women, that's why I'm here. So thank you again. Thank you for joining me and listening to the Kindred Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please consider taking the time to rate and review the podcast and share this episode with family and friends who you think might enjoy it. Your positive feedback helps me reach more courageous women like you. This is my passion project, so without you, I wouldn't be here doing this, and I deeply appreciate your support. Until next time.